Alright, so I've got a pretty lengthy write-up on the Retro Lancer. I won't waste time with an introduction, I'll just get into it. If you'd prefer to read rather than listen, just go ahead and check the description. I'm not even sure at this point where to begin with the Retro Lancer. The more I think about it, the more I look into it, the more I find wrong with the gun. Most people have suggested that simply making the hipfire less accurate will balance it, but I found that to be a totally simplistic solution to something that has way more problems than just the hipfire. I understand the concept of the gun, to counter the Gnasher, but I also highly disagree with the need for that. Why should one specific gun ever be made to counter one other specific gun? It's not even like it fills that role and only that role, which is where my biggest issue with the Retro Lancer stems from. In play, the Retro Lancer seems designed to do exactly what it was meant to counter, work as an all-encompassing number one choice for a specific range within the game. In other words, it dominated close quarters combat, much like how many people have complained about the Gnasher doing. Don't get what I'm saying twisted though, because I can already see what most people are thinking of responding to that with. This is not an issue because it overpowers the Gnasher or anything to do with that. It's the fact that the Retro Lancer is the de facto close-range weapon in a game dictated by close-range performance. Gears has always been labeled as a tactical third-person cover shooter, but really that's never translated into long-range or even medium-range assault rifle firefights. When you have a cover system like Gears does, gunfights can be forced into close-quarters engagements more often than not. That's the reason the Gnasher has seen such widespread use in Gears. Despite that, however, the Gnasher was never the best weapon in every close-quarters scenario. Neither was it encounterable in really any one-on-one situation due to how missing one shot could be so costly. What you have with the Retro Lancer is a gun that takes everything the Gnasher had, minus the insta-kill ability, the insta-kill multi-kill ability, and with a newfound margin for error that exceeds what any other gun in Gears has ever seen except for maybe an active boom shot. What I'm saying is, in essence, the Retro Lancer doesn't just counter the Gnasher. It takes over the same role that made the Gnasher seemingly require a counter. The real problem with the Retro Lancer is that it steps on the toes of too many weapons that also fall into the close-range usage section of the game. In general, weapons that would be classified as close-range specialists perform some kind of special niche role within that designation, and for the most part they're pretty bad at anything outside of that. Assuming no Retro Lancer, the Gnasher is the one that breaks that mold by being more or less the second best at just about every close-range scenario. It's outdone in specific scenarios, but for the most part it's the most versatile. Similar to the Lancer in a sense, although in a much more kill-intensive area of the game as opposed to a support-intensive area of the game like the Lancer is. Think about how many guns in the game fall into that close-range specialist spectrum. You have the Retro Lancer, the Gnasher, the Gorgon, the Scorcher, and the Sawed-Off. What do those last three guns share in common? They're only effective within a certain niche role of the close-range spectrum. The Sawed-Off has a very small kill range, the Gorgon is a powerful but inaccurate sidearm that serves a similar role to the Retro, and the Scorcher offers incredible stopping power at the cost of a fairly short and visible range. What do they all have in common? They tend to be useless outside of specific situations and scenarios. The Retro Lancer, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It covers the entire range of close quarters combat, goes a little bit further, and does it exceptionally well in every instance, to the point where it can be seen as the number one option in just about any given scenario. At any rate, the problem I just explained is caused by the gun's massive margin for error. Granted, the Lancer is notable for the same thing, but due to the nature of the Retro Lancer, that aspect is even more important towards the gun being so powerful. As I explained, it works exceptionally well in the close quarters environment of the game, an aspect of the game that's notable for being particularly punishing in cases where a player misses shots. Part of that large margin for error comes from how tight the hipfire spread is on the gun, so I guess increasing it might not be the right word, but widening the hipfire spread is in a sense a solution. Unfortunately, this isn't just true of the Retro Lancer, but it's true for all three assault rifles. Compare the hipfire spread of the Lancer or the Hammerburst in the beta to the Gears of War 2 counterparts, and you'll see how drastically it was changed. Another aspect of that margin for error comes from the tremendous view kick the Retro Lancer gives per bullet to the players it hits. I'm not talking about the recoil it's dealt to the Retro Lancer user's aim, I'm talking about when a player is shot by the Retro Lancer. All guns give a certain amount of view kick after landing a shot, some more than others. The Retro Lancer seems to be the highest, at least among the automatic guns. This is crucial in close-range firefights, as the Retro Lancer's main effective range nemesis is the shotgun, both shotguns, two guns that are left in a crippling position if they miss a shot. It also makes the single-shot power weapons, which would in essence be the number 2 choice against the Retro Lancer, assuming the Retro Lancer is in its specific range. It makes it near impossible for those power weapons to get a certain confident shot, and they only get one shot against the Retro Lancer. And in the case of the Retro Lancer, it has so many chances to shoot and so many chances to give view kick that one shot that power weapon gets is a pretty good chance of being thrown entirely off the moment it gets shot. Personally, I'm not a fan of view kick at all. I feel it adds too much of a random factor that can't ever be clearly judged. I won't get too into it here since this is about the Retro Lancer and not about view kick, but I do believe the Retro Lancer's view kick output per bullet should be severely decreased, if not non-existent. The Retro Lancer just gives too small a window of opportunity for somebody to fight back against it in close to mid-range gunfights. I gave a slight mention of the Retro Lancer's recoil a little while ago, and that's where I want to go now. As everyone can see, the Retro Lancer's reticule blooms out when it's shot to represent where your shot can land due to the recoil of the gun. While I understand this is a visual representation present for all guns, I think it would make the most sense for the Retro Lancer to not have that visual representation. By having the bloom present on the gun, I feel like it almost aids the player too much. I'd prefer to see the Retro use the type of reticule the Gorgon pistol has. It doesn't bloom, but the shot clearly comes out erratically. By having the reticule expand so much, the player shooting gets a generally clear idea of where to shoot the gun, even at mid-range. By removing the visual bloom representation, I believe the gun has a slight skill gap added, as players will have to get accustomed to how the weapon spreads out over range, rather than having the game simply tell them. It also encourages more accurate shot placement at close quarters, as opposed to placing someone somewhere in the general area of the gigantic box on the screen. Going into the actual player view kick recoil of the gun, I think that having purely vertical recoil will never affect the gun to an extent where it actually hinders the gun in the hands of a player who uses the gun enough to anticipate the recoil. I've noticed in post-beta gameplay demos that the Retro Lancer has additional vertical recoil, but as I said, I simply don't think that's going to affect the gun that much. When recoil happens in one direction, it's flat out too easy to predict. If any recoil should be added to the gun, it should be done horizontally. The gun already had significant vertical recoil in the beta, which was easy enough to adjust to within a couple games. All more vertical recoil will do is cause players to adjust their aim quicker and more dramatically in comparison to the beta, but the results will remain the same once the recoil pattern is understood. As I said, horizontal recoil should be added to combat the predictability. This way players must adjust constantly and manually rather than being able to get accustomed to exactly how hard the gun will recoil in one way every time it shoots. There's one last issue I'd like to bring up with the Retro before I get into solutions on how I think the gun could be fixed, and that would be its special melee charge. Let me just say from the start, I don't have a problem with the insta-kill attribute of it. What I have a problem with is that the gun is given a running melee, something that was not only was taken out of the game, but something that no other gun can do. When you fail a retro charge, you poke into the enemy and do melee damage. No other gun is capable of doing anything like that. This entire aspect of the game was removed, and removed for a very good reason. However, not only does the Retro Lancer have a running melee, it also puts you in prime position to follow up with another charge, a melee, or shots. And at the range that the failed charge hits, any three of those are pretty much instant death for anybody. My suggestion is to simply make a failed charge either not do damage at all, or it should stun the player that failed the charge but not the player that got poked. In short, my main problem with the Retro Lancer comes from how it dominates close quarters engagements with a massive margin for error. Either one of those are fine to have in a gun, but when you combine them, you get a gun that simply does what it wants, whenever it wants, in any player's hands. Not only is it a gun that steps on the toes of other guns in the same range designation, but it also comes with ease of use. Not to mention you can spawn with it. I have 4 solutions that, in my mind, would balance the gun. The first one of those solutions would be to make it a pickup weapon. It almost seems like the gun was designed to be a pickup weapon from the beginning. It's essentially the opposite of what the 3 pre-Gears 3 starting weapons were. Versatile, all-purpose weapons that rarely excelled in any one situation, but rather were good in many situations. The Retro holds the opposite breath. It absolutely destroys close-range opponents and is near useless at longer ranges. As a side note, I see the Retro Lancer as a better in every way version of the Scorcher, a gun that's been made a single weapon pickup on almost every map it's appeared on. If a gun is seen as that powerful by the developers, how can a gun that's better in every way be made a starting weapon? My second solution is to add horizontal recoil, remove bloom representations, and severely reduce opposing view kick dealt per bullet. This is a combination of individual fixes I've listed in the write-up. The pure damage and time to kill for the gun is understandable, even at mid-range. However, the ease of hitting follow-up shots and the help the gun is given past the damage output is ludicrous in comparison to other guns. By adding in horizontal recoil, the gun is made less predictable as players will have to adjust on the fly to how the gun shoots, rather than know which pattern the gun will take every time they shoot it. By removing the bloom representation, the gun is slightly less easy to use at close range, creating a slight skill gap between players who regularly use the Retro Lancer and those who just started using it, rewarding the player with more knowledge on the gun in a very, very slight manner. And by reducing the view kick dealt to opposing players, guns that originally stood no chance in the case of missing one shot will be given a comfort zone, knowing that that one shot that they take will land in the area they intended it to, rather than being thrown off by inches, causing them to miss their automatic firing target entirely. My third solution would be to rework the damage and fire rate of the gun. As it stands, the Retro Lancer has the same exact fire rate as the Lancer. An interesting thing to note, however, is that the original Gears of War 1 Lancer was built with double the fire rate of the current Lancer and Retro Lancer, while being a weaker gun bullet for bullet. I can only assume the fire rate was lowered to accommodate the addition of stopping power. What I'd suggest is for the Retro Lancer to be completely reworked to resemble the Gears of War 1 Lancer stat-wise. The original Lancer shot at a rate of 900 rounds per minute and downed in as few as 10 headshots and 12 body shots. I wouldn't mind seeing something similar, although very obviously with minimal stopping power per bullet, in the make of the Retro Lancer. Having a fire rate of 800 and 900 rounds per minute would make sense due to the gun's vicious recoil, while the lower damage would be complemented by the faster rate of fire, making the Retro Lancer still the quickest killing assault rifle. For the exact stats, I would suggest 850 rounds per minute and 10 body shots at close range to down, with headshot bonuses making it possible to down in 9 shots. Due to the nature of the gun and its inaccuracy, I don't believe headshot multipliers for it should be very rewarding, as they would almost always be accidental. Damage would be treated at range appropriately in comparison to the other assault rifles, and recoil would stay the same on a recoil per second basis as it worked in the beta, but not a recoil per shot basis. It would basically be halved. The point behind this rework is to give the Retro Lancer a different feel in comparison to other assault rifles. It would also make the gun slightly more deadly while being slightly more difficult to use, rewarding players who can control the recoil and land multiple follow-up shots, as opposed to rewarding players for chugging out as many shots as possible in the hopes that the high damage per bullet will net them a kill. Due to the smaller clip size of the Retro Lancer, it would also promote paced and accurate shots, as shooting erratically could burn through ammo too quickly to net kills with it if players aren't careful. My fourth solution would be to remove stopping power and opposing view kick dealt per bullet. As stated in the main write-up, the biggest issue I have with the Retro Lancer is its margin for error. By removing the factors that can throw off an opponent's shot, the field is even for players using single-shot weapons versus a Retro Lancer, as they can confidently place shots without worrying about it being thrown off by one bullet. The Retro would remain powerful, but it would allow other weapons their fair chance at close range. All four of those solutions universally would include a wider hip-fire spread, as well as a fix to make failed charges less devastating. Hip-fire spread should be significantly wider than any previous assault rifles, while a failed charge needs to result in either no damage or needs to punish the player for failing a charge, such as stun him.
Sorry, Doom, I could have helped. Kicked in the face. Gone jacked, yeah. I get camp points. Oh no, I'm about to die. Painful death. That was a fuck, baby. Yeah, you just saw. Guy behind you. I was right inside of him, no homo.
It's go time, baby!
La 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 la. Yes.
Big Daddy like that now, come on.
Guys just ran past him, bros. Golf club.
Textbook deployment and execution, with the emphasis on execution. Well done.
Oh. I can tell you right now. I'm doing it. Lakers lost. No,